Hello creatures, my name is Chloe and today I'm going to be bringing you my January wrap-up. So I'm going to be organising this from books that I gave no rating to all the way up to my 5-star reads. The first book that I gave no rating to this month was Art Matters by Neil Gaiman with illustrations by Chris Riddell. This book was good. I didn't rate it because I'd come across the majority of the content in it already. So what it is, it's a collection of quotes from different pieces and interviews that Neil Gaiman has either written or done about art. And each one has been illustrated by or lettered by Chris Riddell. I believe he started doing it on his Tumblr, and then that's why they've been made into a book. The pure and simple reason I didn't give it a rating is there's not that much content to rate, and what is there I had pretty much read or come across all of it before. So I didn't think it'd be fair for me to give this book a rating, really. The second book that I didn't give a rating to was The Alchemist by Paulo Coelho. I didn't rate this book because I don't think of it as a novel. It seems more like a philosophical text or a fable, and it didn't resonate with me as much as it would have, I think, if I were a couple of years younger or at a different place in my life. And because of that, that's why I chose not to give it a rating, because it's not what I need right now, but I can see how it would be for other people. The writing is absolutely gorgeous. It's a stunning piece of work. I will say that as far as standard novel elements go, though, the character investment is not the same as it would be in a typical novel, so it kind of evades my usual standards for criticism. Hence why I didn't give it a rating, but I would still recommend reading it if you need something inspirational. The third and final book that I gave no rating to this month was Everything is Fucked, a book about hope by Mark Manson. Self-help books. I have such weird feelings about them. They're either exactly what I want or not at all. This didn't really do it for me. I found a lot of its concepts interesting about how human motivation is linked to hope, but I have read better self-help books that gave me more motivation, personally. So that's why I didn't give it a rating. It's not what I need right now, but I can see how people would like it. It's pretty much the same as The Alchemist, quite honestly. So now we're up to my 1-star reads, and the first one of these is probably the hardest for me to talk about because I don't know how to articulate my feelings about this author and this book quite properly just yet. It's Poirot Investigates by Agatha Christie. I have been a big fan of Agatha Christie books since I was a child. I devoured the Miss Marple series when I was a kid. Loved it. I got into Poirot when I was a little bit older. Once I was an adult is when I pretty much started reading those. And Poirot Investigates is probably the worst Agatha Christie I've ever read, bar none. It's a short story collection, which already gets me offside. I don't enjoy Agatha Christie short stories nearly as much as her full-blown novels, because I find, well, at least with this book's short stories, they all felt a bit like a cop-out. They felt too easy, or a bit, ta-da, this impossible solution is clearly it. They just seem to lack her finesse. Normally, they don't get 1-star reviews from me. This one did, because it is probably the most racist and misogynistic Agatha Christie book I've ever read. It was uncomfortable and offensive for most of the book. Agatha Christie does have a lot of racist and sexist content in her work. This one took it to a different level that I was very uncomfortable with, and I really don't understand how a woman can write about women like this. I'm not qualified to comment on the racist aspects of this book. I don't feel in a position to comment on the racism in this book appropriately, but I would very strongly suggest that if you were a person of colour or you were uncomfortable being confronted with terrible racist terminology and stereotypes, to completely give this book and probably most of the Poirot series a miss. I will also say I do enjoy the mystery component of Poirot, and that is pretty much all, whereas in the Miss Marple series, the characters are more compelling, just treatment of the characters is more fair, and there seems to be a lot less bigotry of any kind in them. The second book that I rated 1 star was The House with the Clock in Its Walls by John Bellairs. Okay, so this was a pretty similar situation to Poirot Investigates for me, but instead of racism and sexism with a bad story, John Bellairs swaps it out for fat phobia with a bad storyline. I really didn't like this book. I was so disappointed because I thought the concept was really cool, but as good as the concept was and the premise, it didn't go anywhere satisfying, and quite honestly, a lot of it didn't seem to make sense. Yes, this is a children's book, but I feel like even as a child, I would have felt a little bit robbed by this novel. But aside from bad plot and some not great writing and characterisation, the constant fat shaming in this book was disgusting and unnecessary. And that's pretty much all there is to it. It was gross. And it was pretty much, I can't tell you the main character's name. I can't tell you his motivations. I can tell you that he was bullied constantly through this book because he was overweight. It formed the majority of his interactions with the other children in this book. I would not recommend it in any circumstance for a child or an adult. Quite frankly, I really didn't care for this book. And if I could have rated it lower, I would have. So my only 2-star read this month was Taken at the Flood by Agatha Christie. This one was much lighter on the racism and sexism than Poirot Investigates, but the bad writing was still a thing, and I really don't get it. I don't know. I'm very confused, especially because as much as Poirot Investigates is the 3rd book in the series, Taken at the Flood is around number 17 or even further on in these books. So I'm very confused. Again, the racism and sexism was toned down a lot, so I'm hoping that because I haven't read the books in linear order, that's why I keep stumbling across them, and maybe Agatha Christie went through some growth as a person. But as a story, Taken at the Flood was not good. And oddly, I cannot tell you why it is called Taken at the Flood. There is no flood in this book. It was weird. Essentially, the plotline for this book is a wealthy man is killed in a bomb drop during the Second World War. His very young widow of not very long inherits his fortune, and his various relatives who he has taught to rely on him for money all end up in desperate straits. The initial crime that Poirot is contracted to investigate is the young widow's first husband's death, because he had suggested that he might kill himself, thus freeing her from the marriage so she could go on and be happy elsewhere. Yes, it's a bad premise. It doesn't get any better. I didn't like this one at all. The only reason it got any higher than Poirot Investigates was the lack of racism and sexism. That's it. So we didn't actually have any 3-star reads this month, which was a bit different, but yeah. We're going to jump straight up to our 4-star reads. Okay, so my 4-star reads are all part of the same series that I've been wanting to read for a very, 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 very long time, and I finally got my hands on them through my library. It's the Modern Fairy Tales by Holly Black. So it's Tithe, Valiant and Ironside. I loved all of these so much. I love Holly Black's books. I read the Spiderwick Chronicles as a kid. I read The Darkest Part of the Forest when I was 17 and I loved it. I really, really love how she writes mythology and folklore, and it inspires a lot of how I want to write, so getting my hands on these was fantastic. These books are from 2002, 2005 and 2007 respectively, I believe. Tithe is the story of a girl named Kay who moves back with her mother to the small town they have abandoned. Kay is a high school dropout. Her mum is in a band and has a very, shall we say, relaxed attitude towards parenting. And when she gets back, Kay is drawn into fairy machinations. Upon returning to the small town her mother and she are from, Kay begins to notice some strange things are happening around her. She seems to be able to influence her surroundings. So when her fairy friends from her childhood allow her to find them again, she has some questions. Now, mildly spoilery from here on in. From them, Kay finds out she is not necessarily human and is being drawn into the Tithe. The Unseelie Court, which is the dominant power in the land of fairy that surrounds where Kay lives, they have a ritual whereby the tithe needs to be completed. The tithe amounts to the sacrifice of a human so that the fae, who are technically speaking unallied with a court of any kind, will not basically rampage through the human world. They will be tied to the Unseelie Court. It's very, very good. There's a lot of fairies. I know I did a bad job of explaining what it is, but it's so good. I enjoyed reading it particularly because you get to see Holly Black's growth as an author, reading this and then working your way through her other pieces. And it just fits so much of what I like about fantasy writing. It was really, really good. There is also a romance in it that I really enjoyed reading. I must say that my one thing with Holly Black's books is that she's very strategic with her use of romance, and I would like just a little bit more cutesy stuff, but it probably wouldn't work with how she writes, but that's what I want from her writing a lot of the time. Valiant is the second book in the series. This does not follow Kay, but it does feature some characters from the first book in cameo appearances. Val is a high schooler in New York who, within the first 100 pages or so, ends up sleeping rough on the streets of New York. I'm not going to tell you why, because it's a bit of a reveal that's quite shocking. She falls in with a group of homeless teenagers, one of whom is acting as a messenger for a fairy who lives in the city. He delivers potions to other fairies who live in the city because they are affected by the iron that surrounds